Everyone. So in the last video, we talked about the idea of transitions, right? And the idea that you could go from, we could animate from one state to another state. So in other words, like you could have a background color for a button and it can go from, red to purple when you put your cursor above it or something like that. Now, the thing with all of those transitions, here, I'll just go back and preview it, is the transitions only happen if and only if I put my cursor on it. So in other words, if I don't put my cursor here, it never turns purple. If I don't put my cursor above the picture of the puppy, it never rotates. Okay, same with here. So in other words, like the hovering is the trigger. The action never occurs if the hovering doesn't occur, right? So that's transitioning, but there's another type of thing we can do, and that is animation. Okay, CSS animation allows you to animate properties in your web page. Okay, now previously, before CSS animation, if you wanted to have animation, there were a couple ways to do it. Going way back to like the late 90s, we had animated GIFs. I've talked about animated GIFs before. They kind of rise and fall and then rise and fall again in popularity. But an animated GIF is, it's an image technically, but it has a timeline in it. Although it technically counts as an image and not a video. These are animated GIFs. For a period of time, there were animation files that were played online. You may have heard of like Adobe Flash or Adobe Animate files. These were file formats that would play through a browser. These days, if you wanted to have motion, typically it would be an actual video. Okay. And I can show you examples of videos as backgrounds being played. But with the advent of CSS3, they decided we can actually use CSS to create animation within a web page. Okay, so we don't need, it doesn't have to be an image, it doesn't have to be a video. We don't need any plugins like Adobe, Flash required special plugin for your browser called Flash Player, and there were other sort of, other plug-in applications like this that would play back animation. The CSS allowed the animation to occur purely through the browser, no additional program needed. And that was meant to kind of speed up the process and, just be a lighter weight process, because instead of having to program all these special files like SWF files, you could literally just write it with CSS. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you some examples of animation, and then we're going to do some animation. So I found there was a period of time where there was more, there was kind of trends within within web design. Currently, the web design method is, I don't see a lot of animations as much as I used to, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, but I did find some examples that I thought were kind of good. So I'm going to show you guys this website. It's for a person, and I'm just going to refresh it. And that's an animated GIF, but see how this kind of slides in? Did you guys see that? That's actually a trigger or a transition. But you see how this kind of like fades in like this way? You see that? That is animation. Okay. You can tell because if you can get it to occur without having to use your mouse, see how that I didn't have to put my cursor anywhere? That means it's an animation. Here's another example I found. This is see some sort of sustainability plan by Google. So you can see what happens is the text kind of appears and then it moves up, and then this moves up. Okay. So once again, the act of it moving up the page and moving and fading in and all that, that is animation. Okay. So I'm gonna show you guys how to do this. And the main thing you have to understand is we're gonna have to create something called keyframes. Okay. So we've done, when we use selectors in CSS, there are tag selectors like this, right? And there are class selectors. There's ID selectors, right? Meaning that they're looking for something specifically in the code. This is looking for an H1. This is looking for something with a class of class selector applied to it. This is looking for something with an ID of ID selector applied to it. If you ever see this in CSS, and we talked about this when we did, what's the word? At font phase. The at means you're allowed, you can apply it in the CSS, but it's not applying to anything directly. It's like something that you're building that can be used later if you want to. Okay. Now, in this case, we're going to be using what are called keyframes. When you set up keyframes, what you're telling the browser is, I am creating an animation. Okay. So at keyframes basically defines an animation. When you define an animation, it must have a name. Okay, you can call it whatever you want. Like with most things with CSS, no spaces, no special characters, that kind of stuff. So here in this example of in my slides, I have BG color. Okay, so that's the name of my animation, BG color. And then you can see I have this where I say I have from and then to. Okay, now what does this mean? So in an animation, whatever we're animating, there's what I call the state, and there's sort of the start state and the end state. Okay. So let's just say for the sake of argument, I have a section. And let's just say for the section, for the sake of argument, the section's default color is yellow. That's the start color or the start state. And then in the end, it goes from yellow to purple, and purple is the end state. Okay. So it starts here and it goes to this. Okay. So the way that we would do this in terms of syntax is when you create a keyframe, you give it a name, you put in brackets. The brackets hold the entire animation. And I have a term called from, and I have a term called to. The from means the starting state, and the to means the end state. So what this means is there's a background, I have an animation called background color, BG color. It's going to start at yellow, and then it's going to end at red. Here I have another, you can have as many animations as you want. So I have another one here called text grow. That's the name of it. And the font size starts at 12 and it ends at 48 points. Okay. Once you create keyframes, if you actually want to apply them in your web page, you have to call the name that you gave your animation. So here it's like, I called the animation text grow. So if I wanted to apply that to my H1, I would use the animation property, the name of the animation, and then how long the animation should last in terms of length. Remember we talked about, we did length with transition. It's the same thing. So you can say 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 100 seconds, however much you want. Okay. So let's try this out. I'm going to go here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the background. Okay. So what I'm going to do is set up keyframes in my CSS. And like I said, you have to give this a name. I'm just going to call this BG color. You can call it literally whatever you want, as long as there's no spaces and no special characters and doesn't start with a number. And I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to say from. So it's just like a normal, CSS selector. And then the thing I'm going to affect in this case is the background color. So let's say background color yellow. Okay. If I wanted to use, hexadecimal, I could do that. I'm just lazy, but you could do that if you wanted to. And then I'm going to set this to red. Okay. So I have some animation that says the thing that I apply this to is going to start off as yellow and then go to red. Okay. Now, if I were to preview this, this is exercise 9. here in my page, you'll notice that nothing happened, right? And that's because I have the animation and it's actually syntactically correct. I just haven't applied it yet. It's kind of like when you make a class and you don't actually apply a class yet. It's like, well, you have it, but if you don't actually apply it, you won't see the results of it. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, well, I want to apply this to the body. And this is an animation. The name of my animation is VG color. And let's make it last for 5 seconds. I'm going to hit save. Let's go back and refresh. And you can see it goes from yellow to red. Okay. If I want to make the animation longer, I could just change this to a larger amount. Now it's going to take 10 seconds or twice the amount of time. I can make it shorter, like, I don't know, 2 seconds. Okay. And you can apply any animation you want. So let's just say for the sake of argument, I made another animation. Let's do at keyframes. And I'm going to call this, I don't know, new background color, background animation. Let's do from, and I'm going to change the background color from, I don't know, green. And then let's have it go to, I don't know, orange. Okay. This is a new animation. If I want to use this one rather than this one, I need to change the animation that's being applied to the body. So I'll say new background animation, save that bad boy. And you can see now it's applying that new one, green to orange. Okay. So we use at keyframes. We create a name for our animation. We define what the animation does. It goes from this property to this property. Now I'm using background color, but you can do this to almost any CSS property. Okay. This one we'll do it with animation, or sorry, with text. So I have this page here, and what I'm going to do is take this H1 and I'm going to change the size of it. So I'm going to make a at keyframes, and we're going to call this text grow. Okay. And I'm going to say font size, I don't know, 12 points. And then I don't know, 60 points. Okay. Now, once again, if I go back, nothing's going to happen because I created this animation, but it's not actually applied to anything. It's not binded to something, as we would say in programming. So what I need to do is say, okay, here's my H1. I'm selecting it, and then I'm going to apply the animation of text grow. And let's make it 5 seconds. And then, okay, you can see it growing or changing from, what did I say, 12 to 60 points over time. Okay. Now, not every property in CSS is able to be animated. Okay. If you want to double check this, what you can do is go to W3 Schools. W3 SKUs. There we go. And I'm going to go to CSS. And what I'm actually going to do is go down to CSS reference. We've gone through this before a couple times. So if I go to, let's say I select background color. So remember, we use this to kind of figure out and define what the property does. We can see which versions of the browser accept it. But the other thing is also, so remember we talked about whether things could be inherited. There's also this property or this option here, or not option, this information that says animatable. What this means is, can you use CSS keyframes? And the answer is yes, I can. Okay. Not everything can do that. So for instance, I don't think I can do that to font weight. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . Well, I guess you can. Okay. There are some that you cannot do it to. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Syntax. I don't know, like font kerning. Yeah. So font kerning, which is a property that affects the kerning of your text, would not be animated. So some things are not. All right. So in the last two animations that I did, um, we really just went from one state to another state, right? For instance, we started at, you know, 12 points as the start, and then we went to 60 points as the end, right? So start, end, beginning, end. But sometimes we may want to have multiple points of animation. What if I wanted to go from 12 to 60, maybe back to 12 or, something else, 20, and then back to 80, okay? So in other words, I need to have multiple points. So I need to go from 12 to 60 to 20 to, I don't know, 80, okay? So I have 4 points in my animation. So the problem with what we've been doing with this to and from and to is that there's really only 2 points you can do, right? This and then this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you guys a slightly different way of applying this. And it's called, you can have multiple point animation. And what you do is instead of saying from and to, you use percentage points. Now, what does this percentage point mean? Well, think about the animation as a line, okay? Think about this as the beginning over here. And think about this as the end, okay? All animations always have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? The beginning is always going to be 0%, and the end is always going to be 100%. So if you say 0%, that's basically the starting point. If you say 100%, that's basically the end point. But then if you say 25%, what that means is at the 25% mark in your timeline. So 25% would be like here. This is 50%. This is 75. So it's like, what I'm saying here is the animation is going to, when I do this background color, it's going to start at yellow here. Then about 25% of the way in, it's going to be red. Then about 50% it's going to be blue. And then at the very end, it's going to be purple. Okay. So I have multiple points of animation. And by the way, you don't have to go, I'm just doing increments of 25 because, it fits in nicely, but you don't have to do that. I could do 1%, 2%, 3%, if I wanted to. I'm just not doing it that way. But what I'm going to do is, oops. All right, so I'm going to do at keyframes and let's do background color. This time, like I said, let's start at, I'm going to do 0%. And actually, I'm going to make this, not that it matters, but I'm just going to make this all one row. So let's start at yellow. Okay. And then I'm going to do 25%. Let's do, I don't know, black maybe? 50% purple. 75% green. And then 100%, oops, 100%. I don't know, let's do blue, okay? So what does this mean? Well, I'm going to go from yellow to black to purple to green to blue, okay? It's going to start at yellow, 25% of the way through the animation, it should turn black. Halfway through the animation, it should be purple. 3/4 of the way through the animation, it should be green, and then it should end at blue, okay? So once again, if I try this, nothing's going to happen because I created the animation, but I haven't applied it yet. I want to apply this to the body. Animation, BG color. If I do 4 seconds, we can kind of do out the math. It's going to start at yellow, 1 second in, it'll be black, 2 seconds in, which is 50% of 4 seconds, right? It's going to be purple. 75% of 4 seconds would be 3 seconds. So at 3 seconds, it'll be green, and then it's going to end at blue at final 4 seconds. So let's try this out. Let's try it. Oops. Kind of fast. So let's kind of see how fast it goes. Maybe I need to make it slower. Okay. All right. You might have noticed that when the animations ran immediately, like as soon as the page loaded, the animation ran. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to do it that way. So here I have a div, and the div has a background color and it has some dimensions. And then I have these keyframes that'll resize it to be a little bit wider, essentially. So right now, if I were to apply this, nothing's going to happen because I haven't applied the animation. But if I do animation, resize, let's make it 2 seconds long. What's going to happen as soon as I launch this, it happens immediately, right? But what if I didn't want it to happen as soon as the page loads? What if I wanted it to wait a couple of seconds? Well, what you can do is there is a property called animation delay. Now, for this to work, you actually have to, I think if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've done this. You have to, unless I just lied. No, I didn't. It used to be that you would have to apply the animation duration property, but it looks like you can just do it. So you can see now here, let's do it again from scratch just to prove it. If I do this, oops, sorry, I went up to my other screen. So yeah, it's not happening immediately. So if you wanted to delay, you can. The other thing is you might have noticed, like for instance here, when you apply your animation, whatever the animation does, as soon as it's over, the animation kind of stops, right? So for instance, here, my web page is normal, my web page default background color is white. So as soon as this runs, it goes back to being white because, the animation only runs once. Okay. If you want your animation to run more than once, there is a property referred to as animation iteration count, which means how many times do you want the animation to run? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an animation. I'm going to call it BG color. And I'm just going to make it simple. And we're going to make it go from background color of yellow to a background color of purple. And let's apply this to the body. So if I did BG color, let's say, I don't know, 3 seconds. So if I were to apply this, it runs it, yellow to purple, and then it's done. But what I'm going to say is, okay, instead of animation iteration count, let's say I say 3 times. What this means is it's going to rerun the animation 3 times. So yellow to purple, yellow to purple, and then yellow to purple. Okay. What if I wanted it to just run forever? How could I do that? Well, there is a way to do that. You can change this from a number to infinite. If you say infinite, that means it'll just keep running forever. It'll never stop. Okay. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how we could use this. So like in the examples I gave, they were using animations to like move things up or like move things in from the right or something like that. So you could use things like the top left property, position, and things like that to move things around, or I talked about using translate before with remember how I did that with the transition? You could use translate to kind of move things back and forth if you wanted to, using animation. So there's a lot of interesting things you could do with this. I've just kind of really touched the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully you kind of get the sense of like how you could kind of use this to do some interesting things. Okay. In the next module, we're going to kind of finish up. This is not specifically about animation or transitions, but some additional things that I think might be useful to you. And it's called filters and before and after.